final dungeon, the last big obstacle in Link's way prior to the decisive confrontations, and in one case, the Triforce. But which are the best of the best, and has Ganon learned anything over the years?
Let's find out in our top 10 final Zelda dungeons of all time. And if you are new, please be sure to hit subscribe and hit like if you liked this video.
Less than 2,000 subscribers to go, but now let's get over to number 10.
The Great Palace in Zelda 2. This will be a short one as we need the space for the bigger fish, but the Great Palace lands a spot on this list for a few reasons. It's balls hard difficulty, which required a separate save to not send you back to the North Palace, and its legendary theme, which was made even better in the Super Smash Bros. Series. This dungeon may not be a masterpiece, but it is one massive challenge filled with a number of elevators, obstacles, and some of Zelda 2's most notorious enemies, such as the Foka, Aneru, Fokeru, Fire Bago Bago, and the Ra. Only the greatest heroes will pull through all of these. Good thing that the Great Palace was part of Link's second adventure after Zelda NES. Though the Great Palace lacks a mini-boss, in return it hosts two bosses, the Thunderbird and Dark Link, that more than make up for it. Though we already talked about the latter in our previous top 10, so make sure to check that out.
Ganon's Tower. The Wind Waker might not stand as the most glorious Zelda entry when it comes to its dungeons, and of the 3D Zeldas, the Wind Waker's Ganon's Tower doesn't exactly reach the top. However, that doesn't mean that it is a bad dungeon, as it has an excellent build-up from Hyrule Castle, breaking the barriers surrounding the castle and then making your way to the entrance of the tower itself. And this is where the dungeon becomes your staple final Zelda dungeon. Complete 4 recycled dungeon themes and bosses from previous temples in the game, then a maze where you battle Phantom Ganon, a recycled mini-boss through a maze, and then a final skirmish. From here, you have one stair climb left, and that is it for the dungeon, as the rest is tied to Ganondorf's exposition, the battle against Puppet Ganon, and then Ganondorf at the top of the tower. Though a part of the amazing climax of the Wind Waker, Ganon's Tower is a linear, predictable affair that could have better matched the amazing Puppet Ganon and then Ganondorf boss fights. Instead of being a proper dungeon with small keys and a boss key, you just beat recycled bosses, and then a recycled mini-boss, prior to a final stairway, where you defeat all enemies before you can face Puppet Ganon. In other words, we wish the Wind Waker's Ganon's Tower was more like...
Level 9 in The Legend of Zelda. They say nothing beats the original, in terms of map layout likely not, as Death Mountain's skull-like structure is a maze rivaling the Great Palace in difficulty and design. For one, this dungeon is massive and confusing, with an army of enemies that are all out there to kill you or eat up your equipment. If Ganon truly set up a fortress that shouldn't have been conquerable, then this is it, as you pass so many rooms filled with puzzles and enemies that you will lose count by the time you reach Ganon and light things up with the Triforce of Wisdom and your silver arrows. But before that, you have to traverse what turned into a series staple, the final dungeon or the main antagonist lair, and level 9 is filled to the brim with enemies. Enemies such as Like-Likes, Blade Trap, Wizrobes, Vyres, and more who are there for you to experience true pain, and though you could complete the dungeon quickly without a map on your first try, good luck as you are likely to get lost. Beating this dungeon is an accomplishment, and it is this very dungeon that left such a massive impact that, to this day, a Zelda game cannot be a Zelda game without a final dungeon that belongs to Ganon, Ganondorf, Sant, or any other main antagonist.
Lorule Castle. A Link Between Worlds rehashed many of the dungeons found in A Link to the Past, but instead of scaling a massive tower belonging to Hyrule's greatest threat, Nintendo decided to give us a brand new castle that, instead of being a copy of Ganon's tower, is the last standing remnant of Lorule's former glorious past. The premise of the final dungeon is simple and very similar to that found in the Wind Waker. Clear 4 sections and then fight Argus, a ball and chain trooper, a Gibari, and a Moldorm, bosses and mini-bosses that you have faced previously in the game. Is Lorule Castle a masterpiece of a final dungeon? No, as it offers no items, not even a big key, and as we already mentioned, the clear 4 sections to gain access to a throne room premise is replicated from the Wind Waker. Then why is Lorule Castle higher on this list than Wind Waker's Ganon's Tower? 3 reasons. The music of this castle, which is simply amazing, the puzzles that lead to each mini-boss or boss trial, and the way this dungeon tests your ability to combine your items obtained from Ravio and the wall merging ability. Overall, Lorule Castle flows well, is a proper dungeon with classic enemies and a solid build-up to the final boss fight against Yuga Ganon. But we are still far from done with the top-down dungeons on this list.
The Minish Cap Dark Hyrule Castle. Ah yes, the first Hyrule Castle that we will be scaling on this list. We begin with only one taken over by Vati, as Dark Hyrule Castle is a classic Zelda Final Dungeon that, more than the Great Palace in level 9, brings the goods to the table. Moblins, Ball and Chain Soldiers, Floor Masters, Gibdos, Stealthos, Wall Masters, Wizrobes, and naturally Dark Nuts. Everyone's here. And if that wasn't enough, you also hold the 4 Sword, which allows you to create 4 more copies of your Link to solve puzzles and battle enemies in this highlight of the Minish Cap, where you can also use Eslo to glide. This dungeon has everything you can ask for, well, with the exception of a key dungeon item, but other than that, Dark Hyrule Castle does not disappoint, with small keys, clever puzzles, and an excellent Black Knight mini-boss fight, and then a number of additional Dark Nut mini-boss fights that play some pretty awesome mini-boss track music. This final dungeon actually doesn't feel like a final dungeon, but more of a late Zelda dungeon. It really tests what you're good for without dumbing down the temple to 6 linear paths, rematch against the bosses found in the game, and then a long climb to the top of a tower. Dark Hyrule Castle is great in its own right, pretty much like Ganon's Tower in A Link to the Past, but slightly better.
A Link to the Past's Ganon's Tower. Now we are talking. The final dungeon that set the formula for all console final dungeons to come for the next 25 years. Keeping it simple, having an optional item in this case, the red mail, a number of floors where you rebattle some of the early bosses from the games as mini-bosses, collect keys, and then claim the big key to confront a Ganon inside the tower and then Ganon within the Pyramid of Power. Ganon's Tower was the perfect dungeon to cap off A Link to the Past, blending perfectly mechanics that you have encountered throughout the game and previous temples in an original and fresh take. Just what you want to end a quality game. A dungeon that delivers in the puzzle, hazard, enemy, mini-boss, and boss departments. Just a quality final dungeon through and through that makes you think one final time prior to the decisive battles. Still, there are a few better final dungeons, and the next one might surprise you. Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle. Breath of the Wild took a different approach to its final dungeon, in the sense that it doesn't even have to be the final dungeon in the game. Or wait, in many ways, it is the only real dungeon in the game with puzzles, mini-bosses, dungeon items, and a boss with multiple forms. In Hyrule Castle's case, the most valuable treasures and items are found after a long time of first-time exploration of the castle, which is heavily guarded by the most powerful regular enemies found in the game. And this is no exaggeration, as the path to one of Link's lost memories, Zelda's diary, the King's diary, multiple high-level weapons, ingredients, recipes, treasure, and finally the Hylian shield are closely guarded by an army of decayed guardians, guardian turrets, air-based guardian skywatchers, heavily armored moblins and Lizalfos, Lynels, and in the case of the Hylian shield, a Stalnox. Hyrule Castle is a massive fortress infested by enemies that need to be infiltrated from both the inside and outside unless you are heading straight for Calamity Ganon through the castle waterfalls. But why is it only number 4 on our list? As we already stated, it isn't really a final dungeon in the same sense as the other entries, but don't get us wrong, we love this taste of the future of Zelda temples, so much so that it made it into our top 10 Zelda dungeons. Unlike the other dungeons from this list. We love this dungeon, only not as much as the final one, and the next one will explain our point of view more than anything.
Ocarina of Time's Ganon's Castle. Full Circle is an underrated asset to a final Zelda dungeon, and Ganon's Castle is a perfect example of a temple that has been there ever since you claimed the Master Sword as Adult Link, but couldn't enter because of the castle moat. This dungeon has the by far best build-up in the series, with this structure replacing Hyrule Castle as the prime symbol of Ganondorf's takeover and tyranny over the last 7 years. Since in reality, awakening the sages serves only one purpose: getting inside Ganon's castle and then confronting the King of Evil. Then, just as you are conducting your final preparations with Princess Zelda at the Temple of Time and granted the light arrows, Ganondorf swoops in and takes away our princess. Oh, it's on. And this is where things get really serious, as the 6 sages combine their power to build a majestic bridge for you to the castle, and then ask for your help to dispel the barrier, obtain the Giant's Gauntlet, reach the end of the 6 rooms which offer new challenges from previous dungeons, and even scrap dungeons, and then begin the long climb to the top of the castle and Ganondorf. On our way, however, there are a few Lizalfos, Stalfos, and even Iron Knuckles, before we can regain some strength in the lower chamber below Ganondorf's throne room. The scene that then follows is legendary, as the Triforce of Courage, Wisdom, and Power resonate. Just like pretty much everything else in Ocarina of Time, Ganon's castle is paced perfectly, but even so, there are 2 final dungeons that in our humble opinion are even better, beginning with
Skyward Sword's Skykeep. Sometimes different is better, and this is definitely the case for Skyward Sword's final dungeon, Skykeep. And challenging conventions is something that Skykeep did long before it was cool. For one, to enter the dungeon, you have to obtain the Stone of Trials, which requires beating the Silent Realm of Skyloft. But this is only the prologue, and Skykeep doesn't fool around, directly introducing you to the puzzle box mechanic where you alter and arrange the 8 rooms in order to progress and collect the Triforce of Power, Wisdom, and Courage. And this is easier said than done, as Skyloft really tests if you are worthy to hold the ultimate relic of the Golden Goddesses and Goddess Hylia. Similarly to Ganon's castle, the challenges offered to you are shorter, but at the same time, advanced versions of the challenges you faced in previous temples. In other words, exactly what a final Zelda dungeon should offer. One final challenge or trial prior to the decisive confrontation. Only, Skykeep does this better than Ganon's castle, with narrow rooms and somewhat challenging opponents and proper mini-bosses such as Dreadfuse, Metal Shield Moblin, Moldorm, and Stallmaster, all while solving puzzles and manipulating the dungeon room placements. Skykeep has it all, with the exception of a boss fight at the end of it, and this one takes place back on the surface. But to its defense, is the only instance in the Zelda series where you actively collect the Triforce of Power, Wisdom, and Courage, and then use it to crush the greatest evil of the world. Then what could possibly beat Skykeep? Oh, you know what it is. Twilight Princess's Hyrule Castle. Hyrule Castle is the most important location in Twilight Princess, as it is the only dungeon you visit 3 times. First at the beginning of the game in the sewers and Zelda's tower after a way too long tutorial, but where you are rewarded with meeting Zelda and witnessing one of the best Zelda cutscenes of all time. Then at the key turning point during Midna's desperate hour, when Ganondorf seals it away until you are able to break the seal to start the long build-up to the game's great climax. That alone would be a very strong application for being the best final dungeon of all time. But there is so much more in favor of our number 1 pick, as it is when you open the massive gate that you realize what you are about to go through, as you have been teased and then lured into the castle's dungeons and sewers until you finally get to experience the full scale of the seat of the royal family of Hyrule in the Twilight era.
But before you can even marvel at the splendid interiors, you first have to clear the courtyard and gain 2 keys. One of them is pointed to by deceased soldiers, and the other after showing enough resistance to King Bulblin. Yes, his entire character is all about the turnaround he makes in Hyrule Castle's courtyard. These 2 sections alone wouldn't have been bad for a final dungeon, but instead they are only the prologue to the masterpiece that awaits you inside. Chandeliers, puzzles, Wolflink, Errolfoss, Spinner, and Darknut galore. Yes, this dungeon is final dungeon perfection. It takes full use of the items you have acquired throughout the game for its puzzles and combat, such as Wolflink, the Boomerang, Bow, Double Claw Shot, Spinner, and Ball and Chain. All of them have use in Twilight Princess's Hyrule Castle, as the music slowly but surely builds up to the final confrontations against Puppet Zelda, Dark Beast Ganon, Dark Rider Ganondorf, and finally Dark Lord Ganondorf. What else is there to say? This dungeon is the magnum opus of Zelda Final Dungeons, with all the strongest enemies you want, clever puzzles, plot twists, and an amazing climax. Just Hyrule Castle at its very best.
And on that note, we have to ask, do you agree with our list? We want to see your reply in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, then please like it, and if you don't want to miss any of our upcoming Zelda productions, then make sure to subscribe and press that shiny notification bell for all notifications. We are less than 2,000 subscribers, 1% away from the big 200K, so let's get there as soon as possible. Finally, we need to thank all of our great patrons, and in particular, royal producers Kenyatta Ali and Bradley Carriage at patreon.com/commonrealm. Until the next video, this was Conrad, Joseph, and Leo of the Commonwealth Realm, and we will see you girls and guys soon every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.